Hello, Flute Examiner followers. This is a really great day for me. We're doing an interview that I've been looking forward to for quite a few years. The last time we did an interview with this person was in 2018 at the very beginning. You guys might remember the article, The Man Behind the Curtain. Today we are talking stick to pick with Piccolo maker Adam Pettry. Welcome, Adam.
I thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So we're going to dig into a little bit of what's been going on in the last 6 years. 6 years, can you believe 6 years since we had the initial interview when you just mentioned in passing that you were going to begin making piccolos. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit today and kind of talk about custom orders, piccolos. So we're going to get right into it. So what drew you to piccolos? What made you had that aha moment where you decided this is what I want to do? I want to make these instruments.
Um, yeah, I mean that's a really loaded question. It's something that I'd kind of worked and pushed toward for quite a while, but I didn't really take it super seriously for a long time. It actually sort of started in repair school because at that point in my life, that was a little over 10 years ago, um, my personal life was just a complete disaster. It was a mess, and I was really a very miserable, unhappy person. Um, and when I was in school, I realized that I liked making things more than fixing them. And when I left repair school, there weren't really very many opportunities to get into the flute making or piccolo making business. And my life just continued to like spiral, and it was a really unpleasant part of my life. And basically, it was just this pipe dream that I sort of turned into a parachute.
Mhm.
You know, like a lot of artists do, they will just sort of find one thing and they will cling to it and they will just pour every bit of themselves into it as a coping mechanism. And that's really kind of where it came from. And then 2018, when we did that first interview, that was when my name first started trickling out a little bit. And then um, a lot happened in 2018.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's been a roller coaster since then. Yeah, there's so much that could be said, but I could do a whole like TED Talk, like hour-long thing on that subject. So
Well, I think that's artists and suffering kind of go hand in hand. So I think
yeah,
that's a good summary of
yeah, it was a coping mechanism, and it's what saved me because there were many times where if I didn't have that, I would not be here to have this conversation with you.
Well, we're glad you are here. So, tell me a little bit about why someone might want to seek out a custom maker. Um, what are the benefits of working directly with the person making the instrument?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is really rooted in when you can't find like the sound or the personality that you want in an instrument, because that's where I came at it from as a player. When I was doing a lot of playing, I couldn't find that sound that I wanted. I was either really small and muddy and dark, or I was really spread and bright, and I couldn't find what I wanted. Um, and really, it would have needed to have been a custom instrument to find what I needed. Um, and in terms of benefits, since you're not buying off the shelf, it means that you get to have a lot more of sort of a collaborative experience. You get to have a lot more personal attention because that instrument is being made for you specifically. Um, and that's literally what I'm talking about when, like, on my website, sort of like my company, like, motto is a collaboration between artists and artisans.
Mhm.
And that's literally what I'm talking about, is it's made specifically for you.
It's excellent, and it sounds like a really a process I myself have gone through on very different instruments over the years too. So I get that, and it's great for our readers or our followers to understand that too. That it is that collaboration that makes it worth the time and the investment. Can you talk us a little bit about the talk us through the process of the initial placing an order through the delivery? What advice do you have for your customers or people who think that this might be the direction they want to go?
Um, yeah, so I actually announced, officially that bodies were ready to offer to the market just a couple months before COVID happened. That was perfect timing on my part. So there for a while, it was just a matter of, okay, what what's on the news and what kind of crazy thing is happening in the world today. So, there have been a lot of things that have changed over the past several years, but the way it works right now is that we do a trial and we do a consultation. And in that consultation, it's where I want to get to know you. And I want to get to know like your viewpoint on sound and your viewpoint on what you want to accomplish. I need to know like what's your background as a player? What are your needs in an instrument? What is your background with equipment? What instruments have you played over the years? And what are you playing now? What are all of your opinions? Just because I need to know what's important to you. What's your vision for this instrument. So we go through that process of having a trial, having a consultation, and then we place the order where we basically say, A, B, C, D, we make a list of all of the things that we're doing. And then for me, if I'm expecting that I will be delivering the instrument within the first calendar year, um, within a calendar year, it also includes a deposit, just because it means that I have probably already started making your instrument. And it just secures that specific instrument, that place in line. And then I take the head joint that you liked from the trial, if it's going to be one of the ones that you want to try again, I then will take that head joint and I will assign it, and I will assign it to you and to your order. And then that follows all the way through, and then you get that head joint back to compare it against others at the end. Um, and then it sort of sits for a while, and then it gets ready for getting tone holes, and that's when I usually out again, and it's a final order verification just to say, okay, I can put holes in, but once I put them in, I can't put wood back. So I have to know exactly what it is that you want at this point in time. And then I check in again right as we go into finishing, and that's when we start to settle up, the remainder of the balance, and we start to talk through, when I expect delivery to happen. We finalize what sort of head joints that you're wanting to take out on trial afterward, and we start talking through the break-in process. Um, so that's sort of an overview of how that works.
Yep, and I think that's a it's good for people to know that it is a process and that you are checking in with them, especially as you're getting close to those stages that are there's no turning back, and also understanding. I think because I work in the field as well, understanding that that deposit is holding your place in line and it's being there's a reason for that, um, because the last thing you want is you place an order for a piccolo and somebody just cancels it on you and you've done all this work. So they're that deposit, and I think it's important for people to realize that deposit is holding their space, their place in line for your instruments, and it's also assuring that you are doing the work for them and you don't lose out if they change their mind at the last minute.
Right.
So I just want to say that because working in retail as well, the reason there are deposits is to protect everybody. So
Yeah. This is
so
how I make a living.
right,
You
right,
know,
right.
this, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So and that's what I think a lot of people don't understand is that when they're paying for the skill and the labor, they're paying somebody to do what no one else does.
Right. And another thing to in terms of advice and understanding this process is that you need to just go ahead and expect that there are going to be delays that are going to happen. It doesn't matter how perfectly something can go, there are still so many variables that are completely out of my control.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do anything about because art takes time, and these things think they're a tree. They
That's
don't think that
that's
they're
my
an they
favorite.
think they're a tree. And And art takes time. And I mean, I literally just had an order that was getting ready to get tone holes to go in, and they're one of the orders that's due very soon. Like right now, looking at what the date is, but I looked at it and it had a problem open up that went all the way from the outside through to the inside in the form of what's called a check, and it means the fibers just separated. I can't do anything about that.
And I
So it
think
means I
it's
have to pull another tube, or I have to pull another piece, and I have to start over.
and I
And
think
that I couldn't do anything about it.
I think it's important that you say that because that could have always been there and it
Yeah.
just decided to open that day. that
Mhm.
that you can't control how the tree grows, that there are it's wood, it's natural, and that was always ever from the day we met that we started talking about this stuff. Wood thinks it's still a tree. That, and I've used that phrase many times, thank you very much, because I think it kind of sums it up, it that's why the article, the title of this interview, from stick to pick, just kind of clicked with me because of your saying or what you've told me. So I think it's important that people understand that wood is natural. You can buy the most beautiful dining room table and it may just crack open one day just because it's had that there its entire life.
I've had instruments where I was putting tone holes in them, and it hit some sort of the cutter making the outside relief on the tone hole. It hit some sort of flaw, and the piece shattered in my face.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? I don't know what happened. I just know all of a sudden it exploded, and that's terrifying. You go change your pants after that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you have to have that conversation and say, okay, hey, here's where we are. Sorry, it's out of my control.
Yeah. So I think that's important for people to know, and hopefully you're wearing a face shield when you're doing
Yeah,
that.
I'm a lot better. I have learned a lot of lessons, and I keep those kinds of things in a special box. And then I write the lesson that was learned on them. And some of those are, like, wear safety glasses. And then some of them are respect your equipment.
Yeah. I,
Uh,
I
yeah,
think any of us who have dealt with power tools probably have some of those thoughts and memories as well. So that's
yeah,
great. I mean, I think it's something to keep in mind as people are playing wood instruments, oboes, clarinets, piccolos, flutes, that it is a natural substance that is constantly changing. And I think it's important for people to realize that things happen and it's out of the control of anybody involved. So, so
we have a way of knowing what happened to it. No way.
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, that's great. I think that's really important for people to keep in mind. So, interesting for me is your piccolos provide a voice that I've not heard on the market prior to your instrument. What makes your instrument different, and what was your mindset regarding the design and the sound concept?
Um, well, I had a very clear sort of concept of sound pretty early on. Even just as a player, that was just something that I excelled at, was just concept of sound, and that was a strength of mine. Um, but I couldn't find what I wanted in an instrument in a piccolo in the market before. Sort of as I mentioned earlier, either I was warm and but I was muddy and small, or I would be like really bright and nasal and spread or thin. And then I've had some that were like really, there were some brands that were like right in the middle, but the sound was was diffuse. It was, it just wasn't clear. Um, and I also struggled with the fact that I always felt like I had to pull back from all of the instruments in the market. And I wanted to be able to play an instrument in a way that I wasn't operating from a place of fear. So I wanted an instrument that did most of the work for me and that I could just let go. And I wanted a completely different concept. I wanted something that was very clean. I wanted something that was very clear. I wanted it to be compact and dense because I don't feel like I should have to expend a whole lot of energy to cut straight through an orchestra, because there are certain types of singers out there that can stand behind, a Wagnerian orchestra and cut clear through. And it's not because they're loud, it's of how they shape the sound. So I wanted something that was smaller and a bit more um, demure up close. So that way you can hear everyone around you. But then when you listen in the back of the hall, it carries really well. So one of the things that most players experience when they play my instruments is it doesn't seem like it's a bold sound up close, but then they ask their colleagues or their friends or whoever's listening, and they'll ask, how loud do you think you are? And they're thinking, I may be like mezzo piano, mezzo forte, and they're like, no, you're loud. You're loud. It carries. Um, and there was nothing like that in the market. Um, yeah, it's a totally different learning. It's a very steep it's a very steep learning curve. It's a different ball game.
Yeah, it's definitely a transition from what I think a lot of piccolo players are used to. So yeah, I agree, and it's
And the more you micromanage it, the more it will fight you.
absolutely that.
It will absolutely fight you. It will tell you exactly where you are showing tension or where you are showing fear or where you are fighting it, where you are trying to do the work and it says, no, hands off,
Yeah,
back off, let me do the work, just flow and steer,
it's
let the work.
if everything were just that easy.
Yeah,
uh,
but it's a huge learning curve, and a lot of people try to force it to do what they want, and it will fight you.
yeah. So I think that that's also good for people to know about your instruments. Is you have to kind of approach it with a just a very open mind,
Yeah,
because it
that's
isn't it isn't what people would expect normally when they pick up a piccolo. Um, so to take on the role of a maker, um, that's a huge change and a massive undertaking. And there's a lot that goes into background knowledge and learning the skills to make that happen. Um, so, are there makers, technicians out there that you admire and have influenced you in your design? Um, you can name the names and give a shout out if you like. You can keep them to yourself. But is there anybody that you'd like to uh, like audibly thank or give a shout
yeah.
out to?
Um, Well, I learned instrument making at an oboe making company, and I didn't start like so many of the other makers did with sort of a template from where they came from. I didn't have that foundation. So I had to start literally from absolutely nothing. Um, so I have over the past 10 years or so done a lot of research, a lot of homework, a lot of study, um, especially into instrument like piccolo acoustics and why they work the way they do. And, I have a database of almost 500,000 data points on the last 150 years of piccolo making. And I have studied that, I mean, to the point of madness in a lot of ways. But if there is at least one reference to every major maker that has been in business in the past century, century and a half, at least in one spot on my instrument. Um, there are big nods, aesthetically, to like the Powell 2100s, the Gahagan Phoenix instruments. There and sort of a nod to, Bulgaroni has a really sleek aesthetic. There are certain nods to some friends that I had made that helped me kind of get started. Some of the squarer key work is a nod to Lenny Lopatin,
Mm-hmm.
who was very kind and helped me get some key work, some key making stuff going. Um, there are definitely some nods to Powell, and there's some to Keith and Haynes, and there's some Burkhart stuff in there. There's some Homig stuff. There's some Brown. I mean, literally everyone has made some sort of impression on what I think the great parts of what a piccolo should be. Um, and so many people over the years have been very generous, with their support and their knowledge and just the way that they have pointed the way. Like my friend Avon at Haynes, she um, could tell that I was struggling in a couple of areas with getting head joints to behave. And she just was like, go look over there. And she just would kind of point and we would have conversations about sound. And it little things like that. But yeah, every single maker that has ever operated has left their mark in one way or another. So
That's excellent. I know I know you as a very humble person, and I know that you appreciate everything that everybody has contributed to your learning and development. So I'm sure they all know who they are, and
yeah, yeah. And I mean, just people at different companies over the years. I mean, yeah, it's literally a work of admiration is what it is. It's you all have inspired me my whole life, and your predecessors inspired me, and it's okay. I want to bring something to the table too. Um,
and we've had many conversations about this specific topic and what you admire about the the different makers out there. So I can vouch for you that you really do have an admiration for the people who've brought so much to the table and come before you. So I do appreciate that you acknowledge that and have absorbed the knowledge they've shared with you, and that you do appreciate that. So I think that's really important, and I know that there are quite a few of them out there that are quite proud of what you've done and developed. So they're cheering you on. They're cheering you on.
Fingers
so
crossed.
so now let's dig a little bit into so you just acknowledged that all these different makers have contributed so much to the development of the instrument and a lot of really great things. You've made some really cool developments as well, and at some point somebody else will be where you are, and you'll be one of those people that they come to talk to about things. So can you talk a little bit about the things that you've developed, what the cool things that have come out of this project?
Um, well, I have done a lot of things mechanically with the instrument because key making was one of the things that I have always struggled with. I am not naturally inclined to being good at working with metal or soldering, so I've had to work really hard on that. Um, but I have also taken time to really study mechanically how these instruments work and what does and doesn't work. And when something fails, I understand why. But now, as it is, I am the only maker that can do every single feature you can imagine. The vent, the vented C, splitty, Brosa F sharp, the extra trill key, splitty, all of that stuff, and still remain a fully pinless mechanism. So that's one thing I'm very proud of, is I figured out how to sneak in the extra clearance while also streamlining everything so that way it's not bulky. Um, but also with that extra trill key that I call the Omni trill, different companies call it different things. I've worked on that particularly a lot because I wanted it to be much more like a flute. Because other versions out there, it's a one finger like high G to A trill, and that's what that key has always been sort of historically is a GA trill key. But when you start to do that, you have to learn a lot of new fingerings and stuff, that are piccolo specific. And I decided, no, I want this to be accessible. I want it to be as close to a flute C sharp trill in the hands of a player as possible. So I had to figure out how do I get that upper trill not be a G to A, but a G to G sharp. And then when you add the extra, trill one lever, then you have your G to A like you do on flute. So that was a neat little trick that I had to figure out. And then I unexpectedly ended up making pads, and I hate tedious, fiddly little things, and I don't like making pads. They make me a very angry person. They really do, but these were just sort of means to an end at a time during COVID when resources were scarce and hard to get, and they surprised me and they have surprised everyone. And in like blind audio tests, people chose the silicone pads that I make 3-1, and playing them side by side against all of the other brands, they were chosen unanimously. And yeah, that was a big unexpected success. Um, but you know, they make me cross-eyed, staring at all these little circles for hours and hours and hours at a time.
Well, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and as
Yeah,
we
it
all
really
know in
was
the
necessity. It was necessity, and then I've ended up in a position where now I'm kind of walking them through the patent process to see, do I want to do that? Because I know I can, it's eligible, but do I want to? I don't know. We'll figure it out.
well, and a lot of people on the other side of the business, the customers, the buyers, what they a lot of them don't realize is that those on the maker repair side of things, with COVID, we experienced so many production delays, getting parts, getting supplies, materials to make things.
Still not over.
It's still not over. There's still delays.
Still not over. I mean, there are some companies I can place an order and they won't even open the order for 10 months.
Yeah. So I think it's important that the readers, the followers also understand that there were a lot of dominoes that had to fall to make things happen over the last few years with the pandemic, and it's it's frustrating for them not being able to get things when they want them, but it's even more frustrating for us not being able to provide that. And so, like yourself, you found a way to do things in house to be able to continue providing that, and it's a lot of taken a lot of time and effort and energy and brain power on your part to make that happen. So I think they should know a little bit about like how
Yeah.
involved that is and what that.
And it's one of those expect delays kind of things because, there for a bit, I was used to being able to get anything that I could ever need
Mhm.
and have it in like 2 days at most. Like I live in a part of town where I can literally walk to some of my suppliers.
Nice.
But, now with the world changed and, I have found myself doing a lot of things I never expected.
Just sheerly out of necessity.
Yeah.
All right, so let's dig into the whole title from stick to pick. So with this, I'm gonna foreshadow or a little bit of preface that I have placed an order with you, and so could you share a little bit of that making process? What happens behind the scenes? As a repair technician, and we're very close friends. You've shared a lot with me because I nerd out over this whole process. But if you would show us a little bit about how we go from a stick to a pick, and just talk about the process that you have to do to make an instrument.
Um, yeah. Yeah. So this is stuff that I really only, show little bits and pieces on social media. And I don't even spend a whole lot of time sending these things out to people as their order progresses. I'm happy to share pictures as I can, and I
Mm-hmm.
do with people. But if I'm spending, all day, texting and emailing, what I'm doing all day, I'm not actually getting anything done. But anyway, it starts out with me going into a warehouse or into some sort of storage facility. Sometimes that means it's someone's basement because I, got a lead on some really old wood that was owned by family friend, collector, whatever. So sometimes I have to go spelunking, but it's literally like a stick. This is a log of cocos that was cut in 1948. Um, so it starts sometimes as a log, sometimes it's like this piece, this big board back here. That's a piece of rosewood that was cut in the 60s. And then sometimes I will even buy it in big pieces like this. This is kingwood that I actually bought this year. So I'm not going to be touching this for quite a long time. Um, but it starts out like that. Um,
And that would be the stick.
yeah, but it'll also usually come in regular sort of standard sized pieces like this. So this is grenadilla, and you can actually see the blonde color here is um, the part of the tree that was still alive, because the dark stuff is actually what's dead when the trees the living part of a tree is actually hollow. In the center of it, the heartwood, um, is what kind of keeps it standing. But standard stick pieces like that. Um, and then it goes through a stage where, it gets turned round and it gets a hole put through the end. This one I apparently turned round on November 10th, 2019. And I write little notes to myself in Sharpie on them. Like this one had a problem open up at some point, and I marked it that it may not work out, but if it comes off, it could still work. Um, and then, so the hole then starts getting opened up um, with tools kind of like this. This is a tapered reamer. This is an opening reamer for me. So it just kind of opens the shape up to get me closer to the inside of where I need it to be. And then I have a whole lot of other smaller individual reamers, and some have extensions. So I can reach into different parts of the bore so that way I can really make sure I'm getting exactly what shape I want. Um, so they end up going through that phase here where, it's larger on one end and smaller at the other. And then this is also another piece of kingwood. I just had a whole bunch of that sitting around. And then this is a rosewood that the bore is mostly in, and it's now getting its fittings. Um, so it does all of those stages, and this takes a long time. I can't just rush it through, or it gets really angry and it'll crack just because it's spiteful. Um, but then it gets to where it has its fittings and it's turned and it's polished, and that's usually where it stays for a good bit. Um, and then that's usually the stage where if someone has a head joint from a trial, then I go through and I make body tubes like that, like in the dozens. I mean, I do them in big batches to save on time. And that's where I will go through and I will take the head joint from the trial and I will test play all the tubes because they still play a low D. And I will see which combination is the best for everyone. Because, I only have so many bodies at a time and I have all these head joints and I mix and match to see what's the best combination for everybody. Um, and then it starts to really look like an instrument from that point. This is one that is going through key making. It already has its tone holes, and it's going through the key making process. And then from there, this one, key making is finished, and I am fitting the steels, and it's about to get the keys polished. But this one has wrapped up key making, and you can see the rods are sticking out. They're still too long. I keep them long until the very end, so that way I can trim them up and make them really pretty right before they go out. Because as a technician, when you screw and unscrew over and over and over, it chews up the end and it's not very pretty. And I want it to be pretty when it goes out because it's new. Um, and then, it starts to get pads and then it starts making noises and then it freaks out. It's like, what is that noise and where did that come from?
Because it still thinks it's a tree.
Yeah, and why am I shaking like that? So I'm convinced that it's screaming at me. Um, and and then it kind of has to settle down a little bit. And then, head joints, if I'm making more head joints for it, head joints will go through different stages. They're round and they've had the bore put in. And I'm opening up the other end to get the fittings. Um, and it just slowly starts to take shape.
Well,
So
and I want to emphasize something that you kind of touched on. Between these phases, you let the wood rest because it needs to, because you're shocking the wood every time you do something new to it, which is part of the reason why the custom building process does take some time. Because you have to let that wood rest. You can't just make a piccolo in a week and send it out and expect it to play and the customer be happy. So that is something I think it's important
uh,
people
it,
realize.
it used to be alive.
Yeah.
This was alive at
Yeah.
one point in time. This was not intended to make an instrument. This was a living organism. So we have to treat it like that. Because, you can't, just go from being out of shape and overweight to, being like Mr. Universe in like 30 seconds. You can't
Right.
do that. It doesn't work. Um, but yeah, it takes time. Um,
Yeah.
Because if you rush it, it will crack.
Yeah, and that's something I think that people on the other end may not realize is that there is a process, and it needs to rest between so that things settle. Because as you're doing your process to the instrument or to the piece of wood, things shift and change as it's getting used to becoming an instrument. And sometimes you have to correct things that shift, and sometimes things shift too far the
It
other
moves.
way. Yeah, so there's a lot of moving. Um, and can talk a little bit about the break in period when someone gets their instrument.
Yeah. So my instruments at least need to be broken in. Not so much that I'm worried about them cracking, but more that my instruments are so flexible with what they can do in terms of pitch and response that the break-in period is more about the two of you getting to know each other because you've learned how to play on other instruments that had certain tendencies and you learned habits from those instruments. And this is where you have to learn new habits
Mm-hmm.
because it's a new instrument and this instrument doesn't need a lot of that. But it means that the first like 3 to 4 weeks is a process that I've outlined. So that way you can really find your pitch center. And so that way the instrument can help sort of find its identity as well, because it's learning how to resonate and pads are moving, parts are compressing, the wood is shifting, it's doing all of these different things. And I have a lot of things I do to mitigate that and to work around it and to, you know, pre-plan some of that stuff, but it's a relationship that you're building.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really having to spend the time to get to know each other.
So now we come to the part that I've been looking forward to.
Mhm.
Um, we started out with a stick, and now we have a pick. This is the official unveiling of my brand new all Kingwood Pettry Piccolo. And you'll forgive me, I did put a piece of tape over the vented seat because it's in a slightly different location than I'm used to. But so yeah, so I am now a proud owner and customer that such a dear friend of mine got to make this instrument for me, and I am currently in that break-in, getting to know it process. And it's a very like I said earlier in the interview, it's a voice that I've not heard before. Not that I wasn't happy with everything that was out there. There are wonderful, wonderful instruments out there, but
Incredible instruments.
yeah, absolutely, and
Incredible.
some really incredible makers that have I've become friends with. But there was always something missing in the voice I was looking for, and I got really close, but it wasn't quite exactly what I wanted. And until I found this, and so I was really excited when I placed my order for this because it was what I was looking for voice. It has all the bells and whistles that I need and want to use. And Kingwood just always it just worked really well for me. So I went all the way and got a full Kingwood instrument, and it's fully loaded with all the things. And I will say, as a player, it is a very different type of instrument. It is extremely flexible. And pardon, my lights just shut off because it thinks I'm not in my office. Um, but anyway, it's an extremely flexible instrument, and so much color, so much so that, like you said, that break-in process, getting to know it, is a
Learning.
it's a the pitch is so beautifully flexible that you can do whatever you want with it. And I do find that I have access to so much more dynamic contrast, color, projection, and that flexibility of pitch is what's really important to me. And on top of that, I've always been a very relaxed player when it came to flute, but piccolo never really allowed me to do that because you have to have a firm embouchure and a very strong support of air behind it. And this, for me, plays more like my flute. It's a lot more open and accessible, um, and I don't feel like my head's going to explode sometimes when I go up to that third register. and it definitely puts out sound. And I've had a few friends I've recorded for and sent it to them, and they're just like, it's such a rich, colorful sound. So I thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to my next year of really getting to play this instrument and show it off. And I've got some gigs that it will be used on in the coming year, so it'll be a really great opportunity to showcase that instrument for you and for me. Um, thank you very much, and it's I know it's
Thank
been
you. It was my privilege. But
it's
that was it was a hard one.
yeah.
I mean, that's the first Kingwood body that I've ever made. And it had there was a learning curve for me there, you know. But yeah, it's a beast. It'll do a lot, but you have to get to know it.
Yep, and it's a process. That's my favorite word for this interview. It's a process because there's the
It's a
building
process. I
process.
wanted to basically just like slouch in my chair and wheeze into the instrument, complete conductor's brain clean into.
Yep,
Kind of the goal.
yeah,
I don't want to try. I want it to do all the work. But that's a different personality.
absolutely, absolutely. So it's great, and for those of you out there who know me, you'll be seeing more of this instrument out and about as I travel and do different performances. So it's I can't tell you enough. Absolutely, when you have the opportunity to try one of his piccolos, please do, because they are you got to approach it with an open mind because it's not what you're used to in terms of what you've played in the past. It's a very different feel, and they're taking off. Like, people are very interested in them, and you're going to see more and more of them in the coming years for sure. I guarantee it. It's and
I just switched in the full-time maker
yeah.
like this year. It's been full-time, and that was not true 8 years ago or however long ago it was. I was mostly doing repairs.
Well, and anybody who knows me knows that I'm very particular about my instruments. So this isn't a decision I made lightly, making this change, um, because I've had access to some really beautiful instruments over the years. And but this is my voice, and this is why I made this change, because I also very much believe in what you're doing, and I believe that this instrument will allow me to do what I need to do. So just putting that out there as my own personal support. But again, it always comes down to what works best for you, and not every instrument works for every person.
No,
So, you know, love it or hate it, it's a beautiful instrument, and if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. There's something else for you out there. Um,
there's so many great instruments out there.
there are
So
there are so many beautifully made instruments. So, and I would say, like, in the world of flute, we have 1,001 different makers. When it comes to the piccolo, when the top tier instruments we're considering those, there really aren't that many. There,
I
you can
mean,
count
the
them
list
all
is
on
getting
two
smaller.
hands. Yeah.
List is getting smaller.
Yeah. So this is we're looking at the new generation of instruments that are starting to come out, and so this is a huge step for piccolo making and for you. So we definitely wish you all the best of luck, and we'll probably do another interview and see how things are going in a few more years. Maybe not six, but hopefully before then. But you are planning to be at the next NFA in Atlanta?
Yeah, it's 15 minutes from my house.
so so for those out there who are planning to attend NFA next year, you'll have a great opportunity to stop by and visit Adam. So one last question before we go. Um, what can we look forward to seeing from you in the coming year or next 2 years, and any special projects that you want to tease or show off?
Um, yeah. So people are starting now to see something that when I decided I would be a piccolo maker, something that I planned from the very beginning, and it's something that is actually very common in the oboe and the clarinet world with how they approach sound and scales and all of those types of things. But there's no one in the flute industry or piccolo industry doing this. Um, Specifically, how we address bores and scales to really dial in and calibrate sound and pitch. And it's really interesting stuff. Um, but I've always been very clear that when I announced Piccolos, I was announcing the Pettry Prestige. And if people asked carefully, I would be saying that yours is the Pettry Illusionist, which is a super geeky um, reference there. If you don't know what that reference is, you have to catch me sometime. But Keith's instrument is one of these sneaky little projects. So is this one. I am covering up a huge part of it, but I've shown little bits on social media lately, and I'm sure that by the time this is released, it will be. But there's some extra buttons down there, aren't there? Um, but yeah, I've got a whole lot of really cool stuff happening. I just I'm not saying too much about it. But
Well,
there's some cool stuff going on.
we'll
Very cool stuff.
definitely be watching what you're developing, and I know your social media posts are a little bit of a Where's Waldo, because you usually put something interesting in those photos, and
All the time.
if you pay really close attention, you may notice things. So,
Yeah.
um, you know, good luck to the social media
Question
viewers.
is, are you watching closely? Which is also a line from what the references of those names are. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, well, and my Piccolo made a few of those posts over the last year, whether people knew it or not. Those who are close to me kept asking me, "Was that yours?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's mine. It's getting there. We're gonna get it soon." So yeah, so you got to pay really close attention because you're sneaky.
a lot of work. It's a lot of math, and some of these projects have been in the works for 8 years now, 9 years now. Um, the very first ones of this newest project, yours being delivered, the first prototype of what yours is based on. I'm transferring keys over because we just needed to work on the scale a little bit more on that one, and that one's getting tonals, very very soon, and it's all good stuff.
Excellent. Yeah, and I came and did some piccolo training with you, and so I can say from sitting in your shop with you, I know what kind of a meticulous person you are, and you are a bit of a obsessive perfectionist. So
Little shop. That was the tiny like 10 by 10
yeah,
bedroom I had in that apartment, and
yeah,
now I have a much much more space.
yeah. So I know what kind of work you do, and I can't support it enough. I think you're doing wonderful things, and I look forward to seeing what the next year brings for you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Flute Examiner followers. Please enjoy. If you have questions, send them to us, and you'll. This isn't the last you'll be hearing from Adam. So thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you for having me, Keith.
Anytime.